All right, and we are live with another episode of Beyond the Escape. I'm Mike.
I'm Dane.
And I'm Sam.
Cool. So today is actually going to be a webcast where we're basically just doing work that we have to do, and we're just showing you guys basically how we do it, which is we're designing the Giants, which was a funding goal that we unlocked on Kickstarter. There's 4 of them. My thoughts on this, and I've got the basic stats for them out. And what I thought we would do is we would sort of talk about what each of us would see the Giants being like in the world, and then I've already got the basic stats of what I think. Sam's probably going to find some mistakes in there. But I'm also really interested in Danny. Your side's going to be really good, probably for the what is the mindset of the Giants. Sam can bring some of his Nordic expertise to it, but also the thing that Sam just excels at is taking my silly flavor and turning it into rules that make a creature really interesting. So that's the sort of topics I wanted to hit on today.
Let me ask a couple of questions real fast. In what format are we planning on putting this out? Like, will it be a standalone thing or just?
No, these are going right in the creature compendium along with the other creatures.
Okay, all right. What is the we've never done anything with nothing we've written, nothing we've created has included Giants so far. So give me a broad sense of where they fit into the world historically, and where do they live and so forth.
So it was they were brought over during the God War by the gods, and the legend is that there are 4 siblings, and each of the siblings, the gods sort of imbued them with powers that they were already sort of had a natural affinity to, and then the gods sent them out to war. So what I've written, where I started with them, was I said they're long-lived, they're violent, and they're territorial. I would also say that they're rare. I don't want this to be like EverQuest, where you go out on the plains and you see a giant walking across the horizon, which it could happen, but I want that to be awe-inspiring and you'd freak out if you saw that. It's not like, oh, just got to watch out for the giant. And with that, I built in.
Are there going to be towns that are nearby to places with giants where they do have that's their local legend? They do say don't venture into the hills because that's where the giants live, that sort of thing?
I would say definitely. That's part of our fear of the mountains. Like the in the Hobbit, where the lightning storm, they think it's just thunder, but it turns out to be like mountain giants throwing rocks back and forth at each other in a battle, which was really badly done in the movie. But that's another topic. So yeah, and what I have is the hill giants. The hill giant, one of the hill giant's abilities I wrote is that it's very fertile. So that's hill giants are the most common, and they're the most social. So they'll actually have a town, a tribe of hill giants that can all hang out together.
Do they build structures? You said town, then tribe. Are they? Would you be wandering out, maybe come across an enormous, town with structures?
If it's rare enough, I think that's fine. You guys know how I love making everything feel alien in the world. So that way, when you come upon something new, it should feel special. But that could also mean that we could pick out an area. I'd have no problem if, Danny, I know that you're wanting to write some stuff in the wastelands with barbarians, if you're just like, all right, down here in these mountains, turns out there's like 4 giant towns of hill giants that are always fighting. I don't mind that as a plot device or as a, you know, something, a place in the world, but I don't think it should be everywhere, you know.
I don't think the idea of structures fits a lot more with what you wrote about like frost giants and fire giants. I mean, you only gave me a brief overview so I could start working on the art, but it seems to me that like the fire giants in particular are geared towards you know, building and making things, whereas I could see the hill giants more. They're supposed to be super dumb. I think you wrote too. In fact, when I was telling Lorraine about it as we were driving, because you were sending me the thing as I was going down to Tupelo Con in Tupelo, Mississippi, and I mentioned that the hill giants you had said were really dumb and bred a whole lot, like were very fertile. And Lorraine said, "Oh, they're the rednecks of giants." So yeah. I kind of like the idea, like maybe there's like, I don't know, the giant equivalent of a trailer park where like they move into someone else's territory and set up these shitty lean-to type of structures that aren't very sturdy and they're just constantly on the move or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I was looking for the, because I didn't notice it saying dumb, but I see what you're saying. Is they have 6 intelligence and -2 knowledge.
Yeah, so I would definitely, I'm going to type that in. Maybe like nomadic, tent living, badly built. So I won't quote Sam. They're shittily built tents. I also thought like that they would be. They're the shortest lived, which is only 150 years. Immune to charm, and then they would have the rage ability like barbarians. Sam, as far as gaming stuff goes, what do you think? Oh, and I gave them the talents of weapon specialty, great club, cleave, stunning strike, and take a hit. So like, you know, I just imagine them just walking around beating everything up and getting beat on.
Yeah, I think one distinction we need to make is because a lot of this indicates antisocial, but they're the most social. So I think social amongst themselves, right? But very hostile to any sort of intruder. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
They're also, I got the impression like they are certainly less intelligent, but they're also weaker than most of the other giants. So they may have that like the short man's complex, but as a giant, we're like, they pick on everything smaller than them because they're picked on by all the other giants. Also, is there a place online that I can look at these stats as you're working on them, Mike?
Oh yeah. Do you not have the chat up? No, you just joined the group chat, so you probably don't have it.
Is a chat on YouTube?
Or the chat here? To the right side, and put it up in our chat. And just in case anyone's watching and interested, I posted up in the YouTube chat too.
I have a quick question also about the nature of the giants, and I don't know what the lore from you know, any sort of mythological lore or lore from past gaming worlds or fiction or ours says if there's anything specific on this, but they do seem to be elemental in that, you know, there's an alignment with, you have the hill giant, which, you know, you would think that's kind of earth. Mountain might be considered air, but the other two are a little more, you know, obvious, fire and well, frost is cold though, not exactly water. So I don't know, but is there an elemental element to this? Or because you also mentioned them being imbued by the gods with blessings that promote their abilities. Are those abilities elemental is the question.
So one of the things I want to do is make sure I always saw giants being used in games as sort of representative of the elements and not much more. You know, oh, here's the fire giants. They live in the volcano and they have fiery swords. And that seems so boring. So I'm like, what is their day-to-day life like? And so I want them to have some of those things. Some of the, like the fire giant I said is immune to fire. So like in immunities, and he or she can heat metal 3 times per day as per the spell, up to 20 pounds of metal. So like they do have these magical abilities, but I don't want them to be like elemental incarnate, like
right.
I don't want the frost giants being made of ice,
I did mean their abilities and their the part where you mentioned the gods imbuing them with blessings that promote their abilities. Are those blessings elemental in nature?
So the hill giants don't really have anything like that. The mountain giants have a rock-like skin, which gives them. Actually, I haven't added that yet.
Well, hang on though, because if each of the 4 represents something that and they were imbued with such and such by the gods, then shouldn't the hill giant have something?
The thing that I wrote for me that I thought the hill giant was imbued with was the rage.
Okay.
Because I saw it as sort of like a not an elemental thing, but like just that. Like the most fertile, the most likely to reproduce, the violence and the rage, like almost like they were just imbued like with a whole bunch of testosterone. Like the gods are just like, here you go, shot of tea and go to war.
Do you see the 4 as having any sort of balance?
No, I don't.
Okay, so the gods didn't bring them to serve different purposes for themselves and imbued them with, because when you mention the rage, I think gives them crazy strength, but they're not the strongest of the giants. They seem to be sort of the weak. Well, I guess the one thing they do have is numbers. But
yeah, that's I was thinking that it would definitely be like if you're setting it up like as a strategy game, you would have the hill giants set out as your pawns. Right. You'd have a couple frost giants because those guys have mana and can cast spells. So those are like your bishops. Fire giants, your king and queen, and then the mountain giants are like your strong knights that are wearing a lot of armor because they have metal or rock like skin all over.
So that brings up some interesting imagery with the hill giant, which I mean. Big dumb hill giant, I'd say, is pretty much the standard for the genre, but they don't often have the rage ability. So that's already something that deviates them a little bit for Sagaborn. I wonder if they have a culture built around their battle rage. Like what sort of beliefs do they have? Perhaps they have, like, maybe this is when you encounter hill giants, is they have a ritual of adult making, I would say man making, typically, but to be a little more less gender biased in games, is like when they are about to reach adulthood, the hill giant goes out into the world for whatever the specified amount of time and has to come back with so many heads or so many hides or something to show that they can survive, and then they're brought back into the community as an adult or something like that. Or maybe there's an animal that they revere that they view as embodying, or perhaps they're connected to the god Ram, who's the war god in your world. So maybe the hill giants
you could build a mystical component into it also, where a lot of religions have various forms of ecstatic rituals. Theirs could be the rage. Mm-hmm. The rage is how they connect with their god.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you go with Ram, maybe they all dye or tattoo one of their hands to be red, because Ram's symbol is the red sword. And they probably don't use red weapons, but like they view themselves as the weapon, or like they could get really into body modification or scarring of some kind, or tattooing. Though finding enough ink to tattoo a giant probably is a resource management. So like scarification makes more sense in that way. And now suddenly we're dealing with like one, a much scarier hill giant, because if you have a big, like he's almost like a giant, like scarified tribal warrior who also happens to be really stupid and really strong and really angry. You know, from a cultural standpoint, like that changes hill giants a lot.
It's funny, Sam, how quickly you jumped into the world and fit. Danny and I have talked for years about scarification, like the barbarians of the wasteland. The rain there is actually, it can be extremely acidic, and so the barbarians often get scarred from the rain, and they've built that into part of their culture. So it's not a worship thing or a violence thing. It's a just part of their world, and part of their story is the lines on their skin. So I think it's funny. The more me and you talk and delve into different parts of this world, it's like you are seeing this world the same as Danny and I do. So
I think it's just that we all like fucked up shit.
There's that as well.
It was way too many Lobo comics when you guys were younger.
Yeah, that, man, you know, I being honest, thinking of the Hill Giant, I think I've had Mark Nelson's Hill Giant drawing from the Monstrous Compendium 2nd edition in my head, like this whole time when I'm thinking of them. And just with one, you know, sentence and a couple minutes talking with you guys, all of a sudden I see a Sam Flegel drawing, and I don't want to have to fight that thing.
So I'm also one thing. So I started to wonder like more about them as they go, is like, what is their role with the other giants? Like, do they attempt to avoid? Because it seems like there'd be like mountain giants and hill giants are bound to meet each other because hills feed into mountains, right? Assuming that the name refers. And that's the other thing you could get into, is they could actually, like in D&D, the lore is that they actually call themselves hill giants and mountain giants and stone giants and cloud giants and all that stuff. But what if hill giants is just what humans call them because they encounter them in the hills, and it has nothing to do with anything beyond a misnomer? And maybe they refer to themselves as, I'm just going off the Rom thing, like Romites or the chosen people, or, you know, like they have some sort of other name for it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I love doing that. Like, I'll have like a sort of a common name and then like an elf name off to the side. I think it'd be really cool if the giants identified themselves as something other than, like, you know, I don't call myself like, you know, oh, Mike, you know, who are you? I'm an East Nashville human.
Yeah.
Well, we had the same thing. The first book we did with the elves, that was one of the first conversations I remember, is they had elven names partly because they wouldn't call themselves the wood elves or the, you know, they and
that book is great. That's one of the things I love about it, actually, is like, as the human goes through each of the territories, he goes in like, I'm going to meet the wood elves, and then he comes out. I think the wood elves are the Calestri. He comes out and he's like, man, the Calestri are an interesting people, you know. And and that is obviously parallels with human existence pretty strongly.
Well, I want to mention back to the hill giants. I'm imagining this dynamic that's kind of interesting, because think about, you are with a group, you're with a tribe, and maybe you're wandering the hills and you encounter these beings. And not only are they filled with rage and coming after you, you know, berserk, but from their perspective, if we added that component where this is their mystical connection with the god that they worship, they're looking for an opportunity to find that rage. So you're not going to be able to reason with these, you know, because they're looking at it in a, you know, we tend to think that every all beings are peace seeking on some level, and in this case, it's exactly the opposite. The pinnacle of experience for them would be the most extreme rage that they can find within themselves.
Yeah, I think that,
and their whole culture, I think, would be built around that idea, that concept.
Yep, I typed in rage as religion.
So I'm also noting, I think you forgot to include their size modifier in their attack bonus.
Oh, did I? Yeah, because that looks like that's just base attack and their strength.
Yep.
So they get a +1.
They get a -1 because they're large. Yeah, which is actually pretty small as giant skill.
And then slam would go down as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Because they're not. The difference is that they have that weapon specialty great club, and then their strength of 25 gives them a +7 strength modifier.
Mm-hmm.
So where are you getting the +11 for damage? I think they should just have a +8 in your system. Yeah, I think the difference there is that in some D20 based games, if you use a two-handed weapon, you get your strength modifier times 1.5 rather than just your strength modifier.
Oh, okay.
But that rule is not in Sagaborn.
There's so many little hidden things behind the numbers of D20 that, like, there is no formula for making this easy for sure. I mean, luckily you set me up with a very good formula, Sam, and I used it a lot, but I'm also so bad with numbers that it often goes in the wrong place. Oh, I did see that mountain giants do have an automatic damage reduction 3 due to their stone skin.
Nice.
So let's jump over to mountain giants. I want to try to cover everything since we just have a short time today, and then we can stew on it over the weekend. So mountain giants are stone-like skin, so natural DR. They're the largest, which I didn't reflect here, so I'm going to put a comment that we should probably make them huge.
They tend to live up in the peaks.
Yeah, I'd say very antisocial. Look for a mate every 100 years, mate and separate, and only have a 50% chance rate of successful childbearing.
So they're solitary unless you encounter a mother and child pair.
Yeah.
I think we need to make sure that we state that, and maybe this is in here somewhere, but they need to be very good climbers. You know, I'm thinking almost like mountain goats.
All right. Yeah. See, plus blank.
Not to mention they might be breathing thin air, cold resistant maybe because it's going to be cold up in the peaks. I don't know if we have to specify the thin air. I'm just sort of thinking out loud all the environmental factors.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's great. Also, on the hill giants, I don't see any indication of the rage ability we talked about, so you might make a note to add that in.
Okay. I'll just type it under special qualities right now. One of the other things I wrote, and I haven't put this down anywhere, is a magic resistance for the mountain giants. I was thinking that if they're have a stone-like skin, and Trund was like the god whose metal and rocks stopped magic, it would make sense if they had some sort of innate magic resistance. And then to go along with that, I gave them disperse magic as a talent as well. So I would imagine that for a mage going against a stone giant would be, or a mountain giant would be, extremely dangerous. In the spell resistance right now.
Yeah, so spell resistance. In your game, that's a spellcraft check. Am I correct? Or is it the level? I just can't remember what we decided.
I don't remember. Did the hags have it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if like, was it just a percentage of a chance of failure?
Normally it's either like a caster level check or it's a target number, and you roll a d20 and you have to get over that number, otherwise your spell fails.
All right. I don't see the night hag.
Right this second. But
What's that?
I wouldn't worry about it right this second.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll deal with that later. So what, since they're solitary, I just sort of imagine them like living in caves and just not, I don't know. I almost see them as sort of depressed, like just wandering the mountains, not wanting anyone around them.
I'd give them a climb speed as well, rather than like a goat. Like they actually don't have to make a check; they just climb.
Oh, like maybe like 30 feet.
Yeah. For speed 40, that's going to be pretty fast.
All right. They're the largest, gray skin. It originally said back hair, but I think I meant black hair. 300-year lifespan, high strength, low intelligence. So sort of like
300-year solitary life.
Yeah. So I'd imagine like if you ran into those as players, like they would just want to beat you up just because they're like, just leave me alone. Like, what are you even doing up here?
Right.
So
my question would be, in an environment with one of these guys, since you're connecting them with Trund, the Earth God, are they stewards of the land? Like, are they sort of like, I don't know, giant druids or nature keepers that live in these peaks? And like, what do they eat?
I was about to ask that. What do they eat?
I don't know. I was playing around with the idea of for like the fire giants, and this could work for them too, is like, the amount that a giant would have to eat to be as big as they are would take a lot of agriculture. And
wait. Hang on. Agriculture though. I'm sorry to interrupt, but what if, because they live up in the peaks, it's going to be cold up there, right? So they venture down, just one giant, but it's an enormous one. They venture down into the hills and kill stuff, drag it back up, and then it's frozen up at the top. And maybe they only venture down in the summer because that's when it clear the ice clears enough for them to make their way down and back up. And but I was even thinking you could have an interesting dynamic. Maybe even they come across a hill giant out wandering.
I was going that same
giant gets dragged up and so then the hill giants are terrified of the mountain giants because every now and then one is encountered and one of their numbers disappears up into the mountain.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Plus, like a hill giant would provide food for a while.
And I don't see them as super aggressive. They're just getting their food and going home. Like, it's just a force of nature.
Yeah, it could also, like, they just have like a really slow burning metabolism where they only eat they eat like 1 month out of the year and then can survive off of that for the rest of the year.
There's something that you brought up, Sam, about that, like, I definitely didn't want to be done because you're like, what do they eat? Do they eat rocks?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, that's so like supernatural. I don't like it. But then I thought, what if they do swallow rocks and like all of them, and it helps them digest their food and helps them digest it slower.
Oh, like
so
a bird?
they don't have to eat as much.
Like a bird?
Yeah, or you know, some lizards are always like, you have to watch what you put on the bottom of the cage because they'll eat it up trying to get calcium and other stuff. So and that would just, you know, it's like such a small note, but to me it's so creepy to be like, oh, you know, like, look at that hill giant, he's just eating up those rocks just like, you know, he always does. But they just do it to, yeah, help grind stuff up and
so like tear off a bite of raw hill giant and then crunch into a rock.
Yeah. All right, so I'm putting that down with the question mark under general stuff. So I like that. That all of a sudden mountain giants make a lot more sense to me, that they're just sort of wandering around up there, keeping themselves. They have like food preservation, which is having been playing the game Ark for a while, I realize how much of a pain in the ass food preservation is.
So I'm curious, from an adventurer's perspective, when or why would there be a reason for characters to encounter?
Well, that was part of my thinking with them going down into the hills to hunt for food.
Just like one time a year.
Yeah, just and then a person might, well, they might get, maybe they go down 2 or 3 times, you know, during the summer when the ice is clear, and drag stuff back up. And yeah, you happen across it at the wrong time. But I also imagine you'd have the occasional, just like we have, you might have the occasional mountain climber, some person that wants to conquer a peak, right? Or just wants to, you know, I was thinking about this earlier too, in general with giants, is the human inclination to, you know, to conquer the greatest prey. You know, they could try to hunt them and take them down.
I mean, people are fearful of stuff that is different from them, so they could see it as, you know, oh, there's a giant up there. He only comes down once a year, but we don't want him up there. Like, he's got to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, in writing games and stuff, I do find a lot of ideas coming forth from video games. It's sort of like working at Eridani, where I play video games to learn about the costumes I need to make for the upcoming year. But like playing Ark recently, knowing, like, so let's say a Rex spawns up the mountain from my base. Sometimes, like, I can't close out the night without figuring out a way to kill him, just because I'm like, I don't want him up there, you know? And it's helped inform how I'm viewing writing some upcoming adventures. You know, it's like where this isn't something that's a direct threat, but it's the threat of a threat, you know, that makes you have to deal with it. And also I thought, you know, as with
people want to be able to sleep soundly some nights.
Right. Of course, the trick in Ark, and this will lead into the next thing, is the trick in Ark is just to put down a Rex and tame it and make it your pet, because then you're just like, you're in my base, nothing's messing with me now. And so I also see some of these creatures, which you might not run into in their normal lives, being conned into stuff or being used by creatures from the Navirum. As I'm looking at higher powered Navirites, I've realized that one of the big things has to be the ability to persuade others or to hypnotize others and have them do their bidding. And what a scary thing that is, not just for the players, but for convincing, you know, like, let's say a powerful Navirite grabs a couple mountain giants and convinces them to not lead solitary lives, but instead serve him. And then you have 2 like massive bodyguards, and that's how an adventure could run into them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and I think all that's so really, that in general, I think we can say a person is probably never going to run into one of these. Right? It's just, this would be a super, super rare occurrence.
Right.
But there are any number of ways that it could happen.
Yeah. Yeah, going back to the original thing of wanting the giants to all be rare.
Mike,
easiest because they're where no one really goes.
If you upgrade it to huge, its size modifier will become -2, and that applies both to armor class and to the Great Club and slam attacks. And ranged attacks as well.
All right. So I will deal with that off camera, but leaving a comment. All right. So then we move down to Fire Giant. This one has like been the hardest for me to wrap my head around. So least common, very rare. I wrote low hunger, high sustainability. I think I meant that like that they can last for a long time without eating. Immune to magic, except cold magic. Immune to fire and heat. I mean, those things make them pretty insanely powerful. Heat metal is a power. Gray skin, no hair. 2,000-year lifespan. Live in small groups. Only 75% chance of childbearing. Low drive to reproduce.
So if they're immune to magic, does that make them also immune to the Nibirum?
I don't know. I just wrote that down as an idea, so we can build out from there.
Which also suggests if they're immune to the Nibirum, do they not dream, and therefore do they not have to sleep?
I think everything has to sleep, but what if they just, when they sleep, they go into hibernation and they don't, like, they're just out?
I don't have any of those answers. I'm just suggesting what the correlate.
Well, hey, I'm sorry, the power to heat metal, is this a magical ability, or do you see it as some natural component of their physiology that they can generate heat?
I don't know. I just thought that that would be a thing that they could do.
Quick question, side question. Do you have a picture of them? Are they not a picture, but just in your head? Do you know what they look like?
No.
Okay.
No. So that's what I'm saying. I'm having a really hard time. Though something that just popped up while I was reading that off to you is if they had a 2,000-year lifespan, that means that there's fire giants that are alive currently in Athles who were around even before the war, the Great War that made the disappearance happen, and even beyond that. So could they actually be less of something to go fight and more of something to seek out as like a sage?
Well, I remember you saying,
that's interesting.
I remember you also mentioning when we were brainstorming that something about the fire giants siding on the opposite side or something like that in the war from the other giants.
Oh, so the other giants, when they're fighting with the gods, yeah, the other ones would all probably fall in line with the and Danny, I know you hate it when I whittle it down like this, but we're just gonna say the violent chaos gods and the non-violent gods. So if the rest of them were fighting with the violent chaos gods, the fire giants would have gone over to the other side and fought with those that were trying to escape the violence and trying to, set order to stuff.
Well, there may be some significance here too. Does that make these the oldest living beings on the world?
It would make them the oldest that I have ever written. Yes.
Okay.
Save for now. There's yeah, I guess the living beings, because we've discussed a lot about the consciousness of creatures being stuck in the in-between for massive amounts of time. But I feel that that's different because I feel like that's not the same as like living in the world, having to eat, take dumps, and all that junk.
Yeah, I mean sequential time.
Right.
Okay, and they live. You said volcanoes?
No, I imagine them. They're immune to heat, so they could be around that stuff. But I just imagine that they live in places that's like uncomfortably warm. So they could live in the wastelands. They could live um, uh, in places like that, but they don't have to be the picture book. You know, we go into the volcano cave and there's some fire.
I understand. I guess I'm just you said one thing that stood out, which was you might seek them out as sages, but I have a hard time picturing somebody just seeking them out, meaning just wandering over to them. It seems like it would be a treacherous journey of some sort to find one of these, unless we don't want to go that way. But I sort of like that idea.
I'd also ask the question, how many fire giants are there actually in the world?
That is so funny, because I was just thinking that. I was like, well, how rare are they? You know, like, is like 10 in the whole world, like, and then if we went with that, should we up their challenge rating and make them actually like really tough, you know, like dragon tough? Not that we have dragons here, but you know,
that was my next question, is like, if they can heat metal, is that because they like to work metal? And if they like to work metal, do they, somewhat like dragons, like gather precious metal around them for some reason? I mean, do they have, since they have lore of the ages, do they also have treasure of the ages that they may view themselves as protecting because they shouldn't fall into the hand, like they can't trust anyone with this shit? Or like,
well, also, and it's just me trying to picture this whole thing. The way we've been describing them, it sounds almost like you'd seek out one.
Yeah.
Does that mean they're spread out? And if they are, why? Did they have some rift? Or did they just decide, let's go our own ways? Or are they together? And if they went their own ways, then the whole thing about producing offspring becomes irrelevant. Just maybe there's 5 or 10 of them in the world, and but there could be a monumental occasion where 2 of them come together and have the first, you know, fire giant offspring in, you know, 1,000 years. It would be that sort of an event. You know, it wouldn't be just a 75% chance or whatever. You know, well, you'd still have that, I guess, a chance of survival in childbearing, that sort of thing. But
yeah, I'm writing. So they live single, like one giant, one not like.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time picturing them with what we've said so far, just being a community of them.
No, I think solitary. We have to wipe that out now. That doesn't work for where we've gone with them just in the last 10 minutes. For mating. So I'm saying they live single, very rarely seek others out for mating. Big event. You know, it'd also be neat if they like I feel like the dwarves of Greyhelm would really look up to these guys almost as like embodiments of who's the smith god, Sam? Is that Trund?
I think that's also Trund. Well, that was my actual, I thought of that back when you suggested that the mountain giants were altered by Trund, which is the connection to stone. And so that makes, I would actually wonder too if dwarves would worship or view mountain giants as protected creatures in a way, like the will, like they view the mountain giants as the will of Trund and not to be trifled with. And so like if one comes and kills someone, you know, that's just it depends on how religious you want to make them, but I think they're pretty religious if I remember right. That like at least a group of them are. They like well, you know, it's just the will of Trund that this family of dwarves was taken up into the mountains and they go to live with Trund, and like they view it as like this blessing when in truth they've just been carried to be crushed with rocks and digested by a mountain giant for the next, you know, year and a half.
I like that.
Which, so then with the fire giants though, like who, I think I've got the gods actually printed out on one of these things. Like, is there a god more associated with fire specifically? Although, yeah, Trund is the metal worker.
So I don't know. I think what I'm seeing here in my world vision is like a that the fire giants and the mountain giants are almost like the yin and yang of Trund. Because if Trund is like the shaper, then he's in his studio alone. Like, what if he didn't even take sides in the God War? And that's like what the dwarves believe. Is that like the gods are all fighting and Trund was like, I'm just making stuff. And he almost like maybe made stuff for both sides at one point. And so like Trund has this like solitary nature, this like sort of like tough nature, like he's around the forge all the time, but also a very knowledgeable side. And so like to the dwarves could actually see Trund like almost being split into two, and that's the fire giants and the mountain giants, like his two personality types. So they could both relate to Trund, but in different ways. And then that could mean that fire giants are just like, what if they're craftsmen, you know, and they don't make stuff for anyone anymore, but they're just, you know, tucked away somewhere working on stuff forever, you know, until they die.
I think we should also, and you know, it's my nature to go down this path, I guess, but for them, I see a mystical component also in fire. That, you know, so let's say that they're almost like seers. They look for, they worship fire, and they spend massive amounts of time staring into the fire, meditating and staring into the fire. And that's what people are coming. That's the wisdom people are seeking. Because I'm thinking of flame as something it's subtle, and it's manipulated by the air around it, you know, all the subtleties, and you stare at it long enough and you start to see the pattern of the universe itself, of the world itself. And you spend 2,000 years staring at fires, and you really sort of get a sense of nature and reality. And that's their oneness with their well, I guess in this case with Trund.
I think
skip ahead, by the way, and just say I've already thought about this with Frost too, because there are a lot of people who seek mystical union in the cold. They sit in ice, and so I'm already thinking it there too.
Yeah, I like the fire worship, and even what if, because you know the dwarves evolved on Euteria, and so they actually evolved during the God Wars, and were then, you know, recruited into the war. So like what if, you know, every human culture has a myth about who brought them fire. So what if the dwarves actually believe that fire giants are the ones that brought fire to them, brought civilization to them? Huh?
They're the Prometheus for the dwarves.
So I'm going to head on down. I think we got some good notes there to build off of. I'm going to head on down to Frost Giants because I see our time sort of running thin. So I wrote Frost Giant, high magical ability, innate abilities as well, meaning innate magical abilities. Immune to cold, heat, and fire do extra damage. Cannot use steel, amarnium, and tritium is highly prized. Gray skin, white or blonde hair, 1,000-year lifespan, live in clans, high drive to reproduce, low survival rate of young giants.
So I just have a picture that I thought was interesting, and that's it. That's all I've got on this so far. Imagine like one of those ships that's sailing the frozen, you know, carving through the ice. You know, I don't know if you'd have that here, but just think about that type of an area. And as you're going, you see a bunch of giant heads poking above the surface. And these giants could sink one of these ships. Could they live in a place like that? And actually they seek out the cold, so they go into the water, these frozen waters. Or does that conflict with what you've already seen?
No, I mean, I just see them being, you know, honestly, it's the Immigrant Song, the Led Zeppelin song in my head whenever I think of Frost Giants. So like,
Well,
Well,
sure,
normally I think of you know, frozen mountains, that kind of thing. The Conan painting with the frozen peaks, but you know, I sort of think of that image. But I thought it might be interesting if they seek out what led to it was me think what I said before about people who who submerge themselves in frozen water, and I thought, what if that's their thing? They like to but they'd have to get in fairly deep water, and then they get into it where only their heads come above the surface.
I like the imagery a lot. To me, that would suggest that they would be huge creatures rather than large. Because I mean, a large creature is right around 10 feet tall, so they're not going to be standing in the bottom of water.
All right.
I would actually.
How big did we have them here?
Large. And I would
okay.
guess the same for fire giants is that they be large and or be huge, and that the only large size is the hill giants, which are really just slightly bigger than ogres.
Yeah, so I made a note for us to change them to huge and update them. If we go with that, then I'd assume that they'd have a pretty high swim speed. Like, Sam, you think the swim would be about the same as their walking speed?
No, I'd drop it like to maybe 30 feet, 20 feet, just a little bit.
Yeah, they are huge.
Right.
Yeah, in fact, I was kind of picturing them lumbering, just walking along the bottom, but we could go that way too.
I mean, if you're going to be in the water, you're going to hit spaces that are too deep, so you're going to have to be a good swimmer.
That's true.
And that also brings into question can they hold their breath extreme amounts of time? Do they need to breathe?
Definitely need to breathe.
And then the other thing I wonder, like, does it, excuse me, the same line of thinking, but the opposite is if these guys are so magical and they have the same metal problems that elves and other fey races have, are they somehow connected to the Nuvirum? And does that taint them in bizarre ways? Or like in the way that fire giants don't dream, are frost giants prone to dreaming and seek vision in dreams? Have some sort of lore about where their magical powers.
You know, I like you could the twisting effect of the Nuvirum. We could almost, you know, I'd like to avoid the word evil in general, but for the sake of explaining what I'm thinking here, hill giants are just aggressive and they have that rage, right? Mountain giants are just stoic survivors. Fire giants have this sort of wisdom and you know, an immunity to the Nuvirum and the magic. These guys maybe are the tainted ones, you know, the ones that you could see as sort of evil, the ones that, you know, are sadistic. Well, you know, if somebody's out on a ship and encounters one, they're in serious trouble.
And maybe it even corrupts their bodies as well. Like, what if they're prone to strange growths or mutations? Or
I like that.
And maybe that's actually the real reason.
And barnacles.
The real reason for their reduced birth rate has actually nothing to do with the past, but it's that they have trouble. Their corrupted bodies have trouble producing children, and that's the real reason why they cluster together. It's not because they're less solitary than other giants by nature. It's because they're dying, and so they're spending a lot of group effort to constantly birth. And that would also make a really interesting story of, like, the females of that society are basically constantly pregnant and constantly miscarriaging. And that can go really dark. Like, what happens to the stillborn giant babies? And
right. Actually, so imagine that this is almost like a poison that's working through their bodies. The taint, the corruption. that might explain, because I'm not imagining them as aquatic when I talk about the water, just that they like to spend their time in the water. But what if that's a way of slowing down the metabolism? Because they're trying to survive. They're trying to figure this out. You know, they're trying, they want to have offspring and they want to live longer, but this is constantly, this corruption is constantly working through their bodies. So again, that's a way of slowing down the metabolism, is to stay in the freezing waters.
Also, like I imagine, for the entry, you have your base frost giant, but you'd probably also want to include a high level spellcaster frost giant as well. Like, you know, as a default, they're pretty magical, but there's bound to be some of them. Maybe you can call them dream speakers, or
sort of the shaman of the tribe,
right? But just imagine taking the stats of a giant and then an 8th level caster on top of that. And even if he is a crazy mutant, you know, twisted guy, like, that's going to be super powerful.
That reminds me, and we can't get into this in this call, but in both the case of these and the hill giants, we do have to think of social order. You know, and what does that look like? Is there a hierarchy? Are there different roles that they play? Because that's not every, you know, you meet one hill giant, it might not be the same as the next hill giant, and the same here with the frost giants.
Sure. I also, with the hill giants, to go back, when I mentioned that they're the same size as ogres, and the hill giants having a high breeding rate among giants, I wonder if there's like half ogres, half hill giants, or if hill giants attempt to breed with even like larger humans as well and create half giants, or, you know, like anything related to that.
I try to keep away from most half races. Humans and dwarves can do it because they're both from Atheles, but other things have been pulled from throughout the Navirite universe, so I'm just assuming that they can't interbreed. All right, well, we've done a lot. Oh, one last thing with the frost giant, Sam, is I wanted to say is, what if their stuff was runic spells, since that's what you have been thinking on, or tattoo spells, or is that a path that we shouldn't delve down for a book that's coming out this year?
Yeah, it's not going to be ready.
All right. Maybe we'll toss in some of the flavor, like that they do the tattoo stuff like the hill giants, but that it doesn't, you know, we won't define any magic stuff.
You can simply, I mean, if they have to learn spells like a Luminar where they're keeping a spell book, you could say that they tattoo their spells on themselves. I mean, that's pretty simple, straightforward.
All right. Tattoo spellbook on themselves. All right. Well, we've got a pretty good little bunch of information here, so I got to fix up some of these stat blocks. You have to decide what characters are going to run into these guys. And we'll go from there. But that gives me a lot of stuff to think on my trip down to Atlanta, because I leave in 20 minutes. All right, so we're going to wrap this up. Thanks, guys, for coming. Thanks, everyone, for watching. And keep adventuring.